Daniel Ricciardo has been officially replaced by Liam Lawson starting from Austin, and it looks like his racing days with Red Bull are over. But there are lots of other choices he could make, and while there are still some racing seats he could grab in the future, the Austrian team has offered him something that might be really hard to say no to. Could we see Ricciardo stay with Red Bull, but doing a different job? And if he does, can he help the team grow from outside the race car? It's safe to say that Ricciardo leaving the sport was one of the most confusing things fans had to watch. Everyone was acting like Singapore was really his last race ever, but the team never officially said anything about it. Either way, Ricciardo wrote a sweet message to his fans and the engineers he worked with on Instagram. Now that everything has calmed down, and he's been replaced with the long-awaited Liam Lawson, the big question is, what happens next for Ricciardo? Red Bull, even though people are criticizing them for how they handled his career, with many fans saying they treated him even worse than McLaren because they didn't let Ricciardo finish the season with the team that started it all, have offered him a really nice solution for his life after Formula One. Ricciardo could represent Red Bull as an ambassador. This is something Hamilton tried to work out with Mercedes, but couldn't reach an agreement because he wanted too much money as payment. When talking about the situation between Ricciardo and Red Bull, Helmut Marko has discussed the possibility of giving Ricciardo a lifeline in another racing category. He said Daniel Ricciardo is, especially in the United States, one of the most popular drivers. I don't believe he would want to try NASCAR. And on the other hand, if he's no longer an active driver, I don't know if he would then feel like doing all the PR activities that come along with the ambassador role. What's really important to remember is that Ricciardo hasn't said anything about retiring, and at his age, it would be wrong to think he can't race anymore. Champions like Alonso and Raikkonen have come back from retirement and found their new homes successfully. So whether or not the future holds something interesting for Ricciardo, only time will tell. But what is definitely certain is that he has marketing value like no other driver on the grid, which shows through his charm and big smile. This is one of the main reasons why companies like Visa, Cash App, and Hugo Boss decided to get into the sport in the first place. But according to Helmut Marko, even though the situation was pretty confusing when it came to Ricciardo being let go by the team, the Aussie knew there might be a situation where he could lose his spot, which is why he was okay with it in Singapore. Talking more about this situation, Marko said the timing of Ricciardo's release was related to many different factors and obligations. He was told ahead of time, and the worthy farewell performance was, I think, the fastest lap that still showed what potential he has, not continuously and not at the level that we would have justified him coming to Red Bull Racing, but that was a perfect performance. It's kind of an open secret that if it wasn't for Ricciardo, these companies wouldn't have supported Racing Bulls. And that makes it really difficult for the Faenza squad right now because Visa and Cash App are the main sponsors of the team, meaning they could very well pull out now that their main moneymaker is gone. It's believed that they strongly disagreed with the move of Ricciardo being replaced by Lawson, because the 8-time race winner was good for business. And honestly, nobody could blame Visa and Cash App. They're here for the money and marketing. Even if Lawson manages to do better than Tsunoda and put himself out there on the market for a Red Bull seat, the interest from these companies drops a lot, because at the end of the day, the 22-year-old won't make nearly the same money as Ricciardo did for these companies. This is why Red Bull are willing to help Ricciardo as a proper member of the team, where he would be able to share the team's values through his PR activities. But whether or not the Aussie would be open to that, only time will tell. When he was fired from McLaren, Red Bull took him back after giving Nick de Vries 10 races to prove himself. And after not being able to perform the way he was expected in a year and a half, the only thing we could blame the Austrian team for is the way they handled Ricciardo's career in such a confusing way. But that is all in the past now. And what Red Bull are aiming at is increased popularity and fan base in the USA, which would naturally come after their partnership with Ford starts from 2026 onwards. But it goes without saying that Ricciardo's appearances in the USA were always amazing, and one couldn't forget the fact that he arrived like a real cowboy riding a horse during the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, representing the spirit of the true American fan during this race weekend. This is something that Red Bull respects a lot, and if they are able to continue growing their brand as well as Visa and Cash App in the USA, it could very well be through Ricciardo. The only question that he needs to answer is whether or not he's ready to do such a job, because it's completely different from what he's done until now. Racing. But the fact that Ricciardo wants to take a bit of a step back and think about what's happened throughout his career, as well as let the fairy tale career ending not happening sink in, points toward a situation where we will see more of the 8-time race winner with Red Bull still. Ricciardo not being part of Red Bull, and not being able to meet the requirements needed to be considered as a proper replacement for Perez, is hurting his chances to return to the sport as a full-time racing driver. With teams apart from Sauber, no other team is offering seats for 2025, and with 4 rookies entering the sport from next season onwards, it is definitely a sign that teams and executives are turning more and more toward the strength and desire to prove themselves that these young drivers have, the talent rather than the experience of older drivers. However, Sauber might have to update their list because there are 3 drivers on it right now: Bottas, Bortoleto, and Colapinto. And if the Swiss squad that is set to become Audi from 2026 onwards decides that experience is the way to go over youth, Ricciardo could very well be included in the shortlist. Still, Marco's statements emphasize the importance and the main reason why Ricciardo wasn't considered for the Red Bull seat next to Verstappen, and the final step toward his fairy tale ending of his career with the Austrian squad. As the veteran Austrian stated, "I think it was clearly communicated that he has to be significantly better than Yuki Tsunoda, and he only managed to do that in a few races. So it was clear that this story of the prodigal son rejoining Red Bull Racing unfortunately didn't work out. He said very well that he is at peace with himself, and he has come to terms with his situation, and we will see what his plans for the future are." The comments about Ricciardo's competitiveness didn't end here, as Marco took the chance to say that the Aussie lost his edge when he left them back in 2010 in one of the most controversial moves to Renault, which many fans think was the start of his career going downhill. Talking more about this, Marco said, "I think the decision to leave Red Bull Racing was the turning point in his career. Then he didn't have a winning car at either Renault or McLaren. He did win at Monza, but those were special circumstances. I don't know what exactly happened because if we knew, we would have helped him. But the speed, and above all this late braking, and then he goes left or right. In these last few years he tried, but it was no longer there. The killer instinct was gone." Ricciardo had certain doubts about the Honda engine, and apparently he listened more to the sweet talk of Renault and Cyril Abiteboul. Financially, there wasn't much difference between what Renault offered him and what we offered. Again, the thing that Red Bull would have to think about right now is how much Ricciardo can help them in growing the brand and keeping the key financial partners happy with Racing Bulls. Because, as I mentioned earlier in this video, the situation from Visa, Cash App, and Hugo Boss regarding Ricciardo leaving will be viewed very differently in the upcoming period. All of this shows that the sport is a very cruel place, and what's good for one side is definitely bad for the other. In this case, it's the under-pressure Lawson who has only 6 races to prove that he's worthy of a full-time 2025 contract with the Faenza Bay squad. With all of this in mind, do you think there's a situation where Ricciardo will be an ambassador for Red Bull? And if so, do you think that would be the perfect role for his after-racing life? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.